everybody. My name is Casey Wofford. I'm the confidential advocate with our Relationship Violence and Sexual Assault Prevention Program. And today we will be talking about, for our last How to Be a Decent Human Being series presentation, sex and stress and how they are connected, and just approaching them from a place of curiosity. So we are going to get started in just a couple minutes. And if y'all have any questions or anything that comes up, this is the last presentation for this series this semester, but we do plan to continue it next semester. So if y'all have any presentation ideas, topics that you want to see discussed, anything at all, please let us know too, because we're here for our students. We really want to be supporting y'all and talking about things that are important to you. So we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, awesome. So I have that it is 3 p.m. So we are going to go ahead and get started right on the dot. So I want to start out by saying that with this presentation, I was inspired to do this presentation by two books that I really love. Emily Nagoski, she has a PhD and she really focuses on the science behind people's sex lives. And so she had come out with this book, Come As You Are. And I read it a few years ago. I just thought it was amazing. She since then now has a Come As You Are workbook as well that I just noticed. And so I'm probably going to order that as well. But it really just helped me understand, the science behind sex more and just how to be enjoying pleasure more and your sexuality and exploring that. And even in regards to our body's anatomy, we just don't get access to a lot of sex education in our school systems. And that's like an overstatement. Sometimes we don't get any access to sex education at all. And so that was a really eye-opening book for me to read. So I definitely encourage, if you're interested in just learning more about sexuality in general, the book is really targeted towards women or people who identify as women. And she does acknowledge her shortcomings in the book as well, which was something I appreciated about how it focused more on like heteronormative side. And it was more cisgender centric. That being said, she acknowledged that, and she does make a point to try to be more inclusive in parts where she can. But the main focus is cisgender women, I would say, in terms of the audience for that book. But it's something too, it was when I was taking a couples counseling class at SMU. It was when I was taking that class that our instructor said that she would have partners read this book together, regardless of gender identity, and just listen, and it would be eye-opening for both partners. So even though I would say in my mind it's more targeted towards cis women, I really do think it can benefit anybody just wanting to learn more. And then she recently came out with this book called Burnout with her twin sister as well, Amelia Nagoski. And Burnout is the secret to unlocking the stress cycle. So she wrote Come As You Are first, and then after writing that, usually a follow-up would be like another book about like men's sexuality specifically, or just another like deeper dive into sexuality in some kind of way. But what she realized is in Come As You Are, there's a chapter that's specifically focused on stress and sex and how they are interrelated. And she was just getting so many people who read the book saying, you know, what really stuck out to me about Come As You Are was the chapter about the importance of getting through the stress cycle. So instead of going the route of writing another sexuality book, they ended up working together and creating Burnout. And so that recently came out. I just bought it, read it. It's also very, very good. So I recommend both of these books with flying colors if you're interested at all. And I wanted to call this presentation Be Curious About Sex and Stress too, because I do really want people to approach these ideas from a place of curiosity, right? Everybody's body is different. Everybody's sexuality is individualized. It's for you. And so we're going to be talking about maybe some general ideas, but know that you are the only one who knows your body best. And that's a message that I really want people to take away from this. Like, only you can understand what works best for you in terms of what gives you the most pleasure, the most joy, and in terms of what helps you get through stress, what works for you and your body. And so just about me, I do want to preface this also by saying that I am not a sex therapist or a sex educator. I think it's important for me to acknowledge my limitations there, and again, say that this presentation is based off of information from those books that I just referenced. So there's a whole lot more information out there, and this is really meant to be basics, right? This is kind of where my starting point was with my curiosity into these topics, and so I wanted to introduce that. But I, again, want to say very loud and clearly that I am not a sex educator or a sex therapist. And so if you're interested in more sex education, I definitely recommend seeking out a sex therapist if that's something that interests you. Emily Nagoski is a sex educator. And so again, that's where I'm referencing most of my information from today. I am speaking from my lens, right? I found this book. I found these books. I'm a white cisgender heterosexual woman, so these books stood out to me. They might not stand out to other people. There might be other books that really focus more on, you know, transsexuality, on just less heteronormative sexuality, just being more inclusive, men's sexuality. And so I encourage you to really, if you're interested in reading, I know with students that y'all are already reading a lot for studying, but if you are interested in reading for pleasure and picking out other books, like these books interested me, but there's so many books by individuals of color. There's so many bookstores owned by people of color that you can support. And so I just recommend definitely looking into that, looking into authors before purchasing and just finding what works for you. And I formally entered the movement to end sexual violence in 2015. I started out as a volunteer on a crisis hotline, and I provided accompaniment to forensic exams. And I worked as a crisis services coordinator and facilitated training new advocates. And what I have found, something that interested me in giving this presentation as well is, you know, oftentimes I am asked to talk about consent, right? And consent is vital. It's a no-brainer. It's absolutely mandatory in sexual activity. At the same time, the way to get people's buy-in also seems to be like, okay, yes, consent is mandatory, but how do I get pleasure from this experience? And I think that's something that's often not talked about enough. If we want to normalize shifting our culture towards a nonviolent culture, I absolutely believe that we should be not only speaking about consent, but about pleasure and joy as well, and how people can experience that. And then I always own the title of being a bad advocate. I'm always in the process of unlearning, learning, and creating. So I know that I am a part of systemic oppression. I know that, you know, sexism, heterosexism, classism, all those things are embedded within me as well, because this is the culture that I've grown up in and that I live in. So I like to embrace this idea of being a bad advocate because it gives me a bit of wiggle room and owning my own humility as well. Owning when I mess up, or owning that I am not a sex therapist, right? This is a topic that really interests me, but I'm still absolutely learning. I'm unlearning things and learning, and I think that's absolutely okay, but the importance is giving the space to engage in these conversations. So today's objectives, I'm obviously going to talk about our VSP services. We're going to talk about the dual control model of sexuality, which it really resonated with me. It might not with you. Again, like with this presentation, kind of take what you want from it, pick and choose. If something works for you, great, and that stands out to you. If it doesn't, throw it away. It's totally fine. We're going to define stress, learn about the stress cycle and how to complete it, and then understand how stress impacts desire, and understand how stress affects sex, and then learn the benefits of finishing the stress cycle and exploring pleasure. And I think that this presentation actually connects really well. I know a couple weeks ago I did Feel Your Freaking Feels, and this quote really stuck out to me. Like, feelings are tunnels you have to go all the way through to get to the light at the end. And in talking about how stress affects sex, like one of the big things is acknowledging you have to feel your feelings. You have to validate those. It's okay that we are not humans that are always happy. If you are always consistently happy, like there's something that's not being acknowledged. And so it's important to acknowledge our spectrum of feelings. And that is really a huge part of how we get through stress response cycles. So I just felt like this connected really well with that. And so for RVSP, our pillars are education, support, and advocacy. So education, like today, our How to Be a Decent Human Being series, we are big on really not only focusing on supporting survivors and supporting people who have been impacted by sexual or relationship violence, but we're really big on that education and advocacy piece of how do we move towards a nonviolent culture? How do we establish social norms that are beneficial for everybody, regardless of gender identity, regardless of age, regardless of sexual orientation? We are just huge on, okay, yes, we're talking about consent, but then how do we get a norm of pleasure? How do we get a norm of people acknowledging their bodies and owning that their sexuality could be different than anyone else's, and that's completely fine? Like, how do we acknowledge those pieces as well? So that's why, and what inspired this How to Be a Decent Human Being series, to really explore some other topics. We also, in regards to education, we do coffee and conversations on our Instagram live. So I definitely encourage you to follow us on Instagram if you don't already. And with that, we are always, again, seeking topics that people want to talk about. So if there's ever anything that you want to see, please let us know. With support, I am confidential, which I take a lot of pride in being a confidential advocate on campus and honoring that confidentiality. So when someone reaches out, whether it's in person, through Teams, on the phone, however they feel the most comfortable, I'm going to make sure that that person is supported. I'm going to make sure that they feel believed, that they know that it's not their fault, and that they know all of their rights and options in regards to getting support. So whether that's emergency housing, safety planning, medical attention, academic accommodations, needing extensions, needing to work with professors individually to see how they can be flexible and empathetic during this time. I'm here to navigate just what all the options are, whether it's a Title IX report, a criminal report. We want to make sure that when you are on campus, when you are pursuing your education with UTA, that you can do that feeling absolutely safe and supported by our community. So please know if there's ever anything that you need support with. It does not have to be an extreme case. It does not have to be someone's just been raped or murdered. It can be that someone has a question about their relationship. It can be that someone just wasn't sure, like, hey, this felt a little icky. I don't know. And someone just needs someone to listen. That's not going to judge them. That's just going to say, listen and be reflective in that. And so just know that I'm here, regardless of the severity of the situation. You always have someone to talk to. And then advocacy, really goes hand in hand with support and education. In regards to advocacy, I am a huge proponent of, it's not just when someone's in my office that I'm their advocate. It is all the time. It is providing education. It is having conversations within my social circles, my community circles of what perpetuates rape culture and what shifts us towards a healthy culture with good relationships that aren't violent. And that's voting as well. And so advocacy is ensuring that UTA's policies support survivors as well to the greatest extent possible that UTA has control over. Advocacy is acknowledging when a student wants you to use your voice for them in situations, acknowledging when a student be there to sit next to them in support, and advocacy is acknowledging when a student wants you to just take a back seat. They got it, but they can tap you in if they need to. And so I'm definitely here for that. Our VSP is here for that. Jessica and I are, just take our roles very seriously, and we're here to support students as much as we can. And so I want to just acknowledge, I have done this with, I think, most of the presentations, why providing a presentation on stress and sex seemed important. And I kind of have in some ways, but again, consent is vital, mandatory. Consent is ongoing. Someone can consent to a kiss, but they don't want to go any further than that. Someone can consent to a kiss yesterday, but they don't want to kiss today. It's ongoing, it's checking in, it is asking your partner, is it okay if I do this? How are you feeling right now? Do you feel comfortable? It's checking in, it is verbal. It is making sure that that other person is in a place that they can enthusiastically give consent. So if someone has been drinking alcohol, if someone does not have the cognitive capacity, if someone's asleep, those are all situations where someone could not give consent. And so it's clear. And in all of our presentations, you will see consent is 100% mandatory. There's just no questions about it. That being said, we often don't talk about that next step in our presentations just because we don't have the time to about, okay, consent is mandatory, but what about pleasure, right? How do we experience pleasure within sexual experiences? How do we experience joy? And a way that we really do that is by completing our stress cycle. If we have a lot of stress built up within us, then it's going to be really hard for us to get to a place that we are in the zone where we can, trust our body, feel good about our body. If we're engaging with somebody else, feel good about someone, sharing our experience with us. And so that is why I really wanted to focus on the connection between stress and sex today. And I want to kind of dive into this dual control model of sexual response first. And this is from the book Come As You Are, where I learned about this. It was really eye-opening for me. Again, it either stands out to you and you see it as something that's helpful, or you don't, and that's totally fine either way. But with this dual control model of sexual response, it really talks about, as in a car, you have accelerators and a brake. And a lot of times people will talk about getting turned on. They might say, these are the things that get me turned on. But sexual response, desire is not only about getting turned on, it's also about making sure that your brakes are off, right? So if you are in a public area, let's say you're in a public area, there's lots of people around, your partner really likes PDA, and so they start to kiss your neck, they start to nibble on your ear, just touch you in a light way. Those are all things that normally you like within the bedroom or you like when you're alone, but because there's so many people around, that's not something that you feel comfortable with. You don't want to be getting turned on in that moment. That is your brakes kicking in. That's your brakes. That's your brain saying, hey, there's a lot of people around. This is a public space. I'm not comfortable. And you can hear in this scenario that for the other person, there's a lot of people around. You're in a public place. They like PDA a lot. So their accelerators are going. So every single individual has different accelerators and brakes. So it's important to get familiar with what are your turn ons, what are your turn offs. So the accelerators, these are like the formal definitions, is when the brain is responding to sexually relevant information in the environment. So that's everything you see, hear, touch, smell, taste, or imagine that your brain codes as sexually relevant, in that sense, turn on signals. Your brakes is the exact opposite. And so in order to feel aroused, to feel turned on, you have to have a combination of being turned on, but not having your brakes in full effect. And so that's where stress comes in as well. You can have a situation where like you get home, you have like candles on everywhere, like the lighting is great, it smells amazing, you like all the scents going on. Your partner can be wearing something that just you find them like really attractive in. They can have cooked dinner, et cetera, et cetera. They can do all these things that put you in the like quote unquote mood. But then let's say that you're getting home from work and your boss just gave you your performance evaluation and they said, you're not getting a raise this year. If you don't step it up, then you could be at risk to lose your job. And like, these are the things that you need to improve. And so your mind could only be focused on, I'm not getting the raise that we were depending on to go on that vacation. I'm at risk of losing my job, which is how I pay my bills. And I, could lose my job. I could lose what I've been doing, what's been working for us. And if you have been just given that feedback at work that day, you get home to an environment that normally would completely turn you on, make you in the quote unquote mood. If that had just happened, your brakes are going to be on hardcore because you're going to be really stressed out. And it's going to be really difficult to get into the mood where you're ready to enjoy sexual activity, you're ready to have pleasure. It can be really hard to get into that mood when that's all that's on your mind. And so that's where it becomes important to just complete the stress response cycle, which we'll talk more about. And I just want to acknowledge, I don't know if I had yet, that everyone's accelerators and brakes are different. We learn differently what is sexually relevant information. We learn differently what scents are turn ons, what are turn offs, what touches, based on all of our life experiences. And so there is no norm. There's no norm accelerators and brakes. There's no right or wrong. No one has the right to ever tell you what should turn you on and turn you off. You know yourself. And so one of the things that is in that Come As You Are book is kind of acknowledging what are your accelerators and brakes and creating a list. Even if you are just trying to explore, how do I get aroused more with my partner? Some of it can be like creating the context to where you're going to feel more safe, more comfortable. And some of it can be, okay, yes, my brakes are off, but my accelerators are not on. And so really evaluating that can be really important. And some people have really sensitive accelerators and some people have really sensitive brakes. And that can also cause for a discrepancy in people initiating sexual activity. And that can even be something that partners need to talk about within relationships, right? If I have really sensitive accelerators and my partner has really sensitive brakes, then that's something that's probably going to cause us to have different rates of arousal, different desire levels. And with that, that's completely normal. That's completely fine. It's just how do we navigate that together and having those conversations. So from there, I want to move into, okay, so what is stress? Stress is going to be something that causes you a feeling of danger, a feeling of anxiety. Most of us experience at least one stressor a day. And stress is your body's reaction to a stressor. So normally when we experience stress, we will have physiological responses. So our cortisol and our adrenaline will spike. Our amygdala is essentially which is in the brain, is essentially scanning the environment. If they perceive anything as danger, that will cause us stress. And our amygdala is tied into more of our reptilian brain. It's our survival brain. So if we're experiencing stress, if we're experiencing fear of danger, like normally when you think of our ancestry, that's going to kick into response, like what we often speak about in trauma responses of fight or flight. And now we know freeze is definitely a real thing as well. And so let's imagine we're back in the day. There's a lion chasing after you. That is the stressor. So your body has its reaction. You are running, you are engaged in fight. That's what your brain has decided is going to keep you safe. And so as soon as you get away from that stressor, like you run back to your village or community, and people throw a few spears in the lion's direction, and that lion is like, I'm out, I'm not into this, and runs away. Stressor's gone, you feel safe, you feel comfortable, you've completed that stress response cycle from running, from getting that energy out of your body and knowing that the stressor is gone. But really that running, that movement helps you get that adrenaline and cortisol out of your body. And now that you're in a safe space, you've dealt with stress and the stressor. Well, obviously, that is not the world that we live in today. There are not lions running around in Arlington or Dallas, which is where I am. So it's like, okay, how do we apply that to today? So then with today, especially in a pandemic, people who I remember even for UTA, it's like it got announced that spring break was going to be extended a week because people were trying to understand how to navigate COVID and what we should do. Should we stay at home? Should we come back to campus? What is safer? And that is a huge stressor, right? There's a lot of unknown there. And so our cortisol goes up, our adrenaline spikes, we have the increased blood pressure, your digestive system reacts. So a lot of times people's gut function slowed down. And that is just to give all of someone's energy and attention to that stress response mode. Like, do I need to fight or flight, freeze? What needs to go on? And so with that, I mean, with the pandemic, there was a lot of unknown for a long time. I mean, there's still so much unknown with, okay, is a vaccine going to come out? If a vaccine comes out, is that going to be implemented or mandatory for school, for work? There's just so much unknown, right? And so when we have that unknown as a stressor, it's not going away. It hasn't been dealt with unless we do something for ourselves, for our body, to decrease our cortisol levels, to decrease our adrenaline, to say, hey, body, I know we don't know what's going on right now, but we are overall, like, if we stay inside, this is a safe place for me, we're safe, etc. If we're not giving that message to our body by doing something to complete the stress response cycle, then we are going to stay in that place where our cortisol remains high, where our blood pressure remains increased, where we are not going to be in the place to experience pleasure, definitely not sexual pleasure. And so anytime someone experiences stress, and even if the stressor goes away, but you haven't ran from the line, you haven't done anything to process that through your body, then that energy is still going to sit with you. It's still going to be there. So even if the stressor is gone, like the line in the scenario, let's say, like, hypothetically the pandemic is over, it still had a lot of effects. If you do not process that through your body in some way, then that stress is going to remain with you. You are going to have physiological responses that are still there. And so it can cause an increase in chances for heart disease. They say even with fighting, right? Fighting is a stressor. If you fight with a loved one in an argument, they say sometimes fights can take like a day off your life. I remember I've heard that somewhere, because your cortisol levels are higher and that's not healthy for your body. And so I just remember at one point hearing in class, it's like, whenever you're going to argue with someone, ask yourself if it's worth a day of your life, which I was like, that is crazy. What? And it actually did help me to re-examine like what battles I wanted to choose with people. So just understand that when you are experiencing stress, it's definitely going to decrease your willingness to maybe engage in play, engage in pleasure, and it's going to reduce desire just because, and that's normal because your mind is just not in a place that it is willing to do those things, right? Your basic needs are like in fear of losing, like survival mode. You're wondering if your bills are going to get paid, all those things. If your basic needs aren't definitely secure in that way, or even your relationship doesn't feel secure or safe, those things are not going to put you in a mood to enjoy sexual pleasure, usually. And I will say that usually, again, this is speaking more towards, what I have read, but I know that in some cases, for some people, a coping mechanism is to engage in more sexual activity. And that's often a coping mechanism for people who are experiencing loneliness or depression, anxiety. So know that when I say this, it's a generalization. It's saying usually, it's not the end all be all by any means. And so talking about stress staying in our bodies, the way to get that out is by completing the stress response cycle. And that is the moment at which our bodies learn that after facing danger, we are now safe. That's how you complete the full circle of stress. So once you know that you are safe, once you have communicated with your body, right? Your body doesn't just know. Your body needs a sign. Your body needs you to do something to tell it that it is safe, that you are able to open yourself up to other things. So once you communicate with your body that you are safe, that is how you move through the stress response cycle and get your cortisol, your adrenaline levels back down. And so ways that you can move through the stress response cycle, crying is a big one. I know, sorry, I know that I, growing up, have definitely heard that phrase, like, crying doesn't change anything, so stop crying, suck it up. Just, I know that there's so many environments that crying is not deemed as acceptable, or I know I've had students that I work with that come into my office and they might start to tear up or cry and they say, I don't want to cry. But it's like, if your body is wanting to cry, that is what your body is needing to get through that stress cycle. That is healthy. So even when someone is in my office or I'm working with a survivor victim, however they identify, I encourage crying. If someone's in the mood to like cry, like please let it out. Like let your body work through that, because your body is often remembering maybe the trauma that has just experienced. And so it needs to cry to say, hey, I'm in a safer place at this moment. It is safe to cry here, to get it out of my body. So that is very, very healthy. I know even for me, like, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, like you have a bad day, but you're not in a social context where it's appropriate to cry. You get home, you close the front door and you like just burst into tears. Or even at work, you get into the bathroom, you get into the stall and like tears just kind of start running down your face. And you're like, oh no, like, what is this? Like, I didn't cry all day. That is your body saying, I need to get through the stress cycle. I'm at my home now. It's safe to do this here. That's your body trying to communicate with itself. I am now safe. I don't have to deal with what I was dealing with earlier in the day. So like now I'm in a safer place. Moving, physical activity also helps you absolutely move through the stress cycle. Usually people recommend about 20 to 60 minutes a day. That can be walking, running, dancing just to music that you like. That can be a whole lot of things. And if you are going to do that, make it be a physical activity that you enjoy, right? Just because someone likes running doesn't mean you have to run. You don't have to run with them. You can walk. You can do whatever you want to do. Just find something that works for you. I know even I've worked with students who they have talked about, okay, well, I'm going on a walk for 30 minutes a day, and they would do it like once or twice a week, but it wasn't sustainable to do like daily or more than that a week. But then when they altered that to 20 minutes a day, which is recommended, it's like that seemed more manageable. So not only find the physical activity, the motion, the movement that works for you, find the time that works for you. You don't have to do 60 minutes every day. You can do 20, you can do 30. Find like that right dosage that works for you if you're trying to move through the stress cycle. Also know that like if you had a really stressful day, maybe movement isn't your normal thing, maybe social connection is, which we'll get into, but some days maybe someone's not available to talk that you usually would talk to, and that's where we have to be capable of adapting and saying, okay, this person's not available, this is my go-to loved one that I talk to, so how do I complete the stress cycle? So then it's like, okay, I'm gonna go out, go on a walk. I normally don't do that. Normally social connection's my thing, but that's how I'm gonna adapt. Let's say the weather is cold, like it has been the last couple of days, which I hate. So I'm not about to go outside walking, which I usually do enjoy a good walk, but instead I can be in my place. I can turn on music that I like. I can dance around to it. I can look silly, but my home environment feels safe for me to dance in. And so then I can still figure out how to incorporate movement within my day. So it doesn't have to look one particular way. It can look a lot of different ways. Social connection is a huge one for moving through the stress response cycle. A lot of times, even when people are on the elevator or they're in social settings where it's like with a lot of strangers, people usually assume like nobody wants to talk right now. Like, I don't know these people. We're just gonna all sit here a little awkwardly quiet, silent. I know I've been in situations where I'm like, please don't, I hope nobody talks. But then often if somebody does talk and if I engage in a conversation with them, I do realize it adds value to my day. Just the simple act of checking in with someone and saying, hey, how are you? Even if it's a stranger, that can feel really good. It is a reminder. Those tiny conversations can be reminders that the world can be a really good place. Obviously, we know that it isn't always. Sometimes you're taking a risk. Sometimes those conversations can go bad. But just engaging in social interactions that are positive, whether it's like buying a cup of coffee really quick or talking with someone on the elevator, you're walking down the hallway with someone, giving them a compliment. All those little tiny things, if you're on Zoom with someone, you like someone's earrings, you like a picture in their background, then just acknowledging those things can really help move through the stress response cycle. Maybe it's not dramatic, but it does help. Another huge one for social connection is obviously having like those go-to loved ones, having people that you feel safe with. And that is obviously really important when thinking about sex and sexual pleasure. If your partner helps make you feel safe, then you're obviously going to feel more comfortable being vulnerable with them. They can help you move through that stress response cycle and get to the place that you're in a place where you can enjoy sexual pleasure. And then social connection also can look like community joy. And I find it interesting to think about community joy in this time of a pandemic, because for a lot of us, that's something that could be lacking. But if you actually think about it, even in terms of when we think about protests, people are all there for the same mission. Most people are there for the same mission, same goal. They're seeing other people around them, like also hold up Black Lives Matter sign. They're seeing other people around them saying, we're not going to tolerate the murder of George Floyd. That in its own way can help move through the stress response cycle, even though it seems like that is also a really, really stressful thing. Because it's acknowledging some horrors that our world has, and we have a lot. But then that's giving you the message that there's other people within the community that care about the same things that you do, that care about the same mission that you do, have the same goals as you do. And with that comes a lot of hope. And so while that can seem like something that might be a stressor, causing you stress, just being out there taking risk of not knowing how police will react, not knowing what exactly will happen. But that community joy piece is definitely still there and helps balance that and helps you actually move through a stress response cycle. That's also where you get in sports, right? One team working together, common goal, brings a lot of community joy and can help you really navigate through the stress cycle. And then doing something creative can also be really helpful. So for a lot of people, when we talk about emotions, there's emotions in people's lives that they feel more comfortable expressing than others. I know for myself, and I spoke about this in Feel Your Freaking Feels. I took an improv class where we had to work through acknowledging different emotions and acting those out. And when I got to anger, I realized how uncomfortable I was expressing anger initially. And so I had a really difficult time with that one. But then I also noticed even with my improv class that was the space, okay, I am safe acknowledging this because maybe I'm not actually angry currently, but I can explore these emotions here. And that's often what creativity can do for people, is it gives people an environment where they can explore those bigger emotions, or they can explore emotions that maybe they're not comfortable with acknowledging in their life, but when they give it to a character or they give it to a different voice that then they can speak to, they can be creative, they can put in a dialogue. And maybe it's about a relationship that they have currently going on, but that's where they feel comfortable having that as an outlet. And so creativity can be a really, really beautiful way to acknowledge your emotions, acknowledge whatever stressors you have going on in your life, and process it through your body. So how does this all tie in with sex? So we've kind of talked about stress, how to move through the stress response cycle. And I wanted to more specifically talk about how this could come up within sexual relationships. So I've already spoken to the fact that if you are really stressed out from, getting that performance review at work, from an unexpected vet bill coming up, oh my gosh, this can be so expensive. I don't have any pets, but when I hear about those unexpected bills, I'm like, oh my gosh. Things like that. So finances, family, relationships, work, when you have those stressors going on and you come home or wherever you are, it's going to be hard to get in the mood if, again, you have not completed that stress response cycle and acknowledged what the heck went on that day, right? If you had a really, really terrible day that made you question whether you were at risk of losing your basic needs or had made you have really high anxiety, if you don't have a space to process that, it's going to be really hard to re-energize, reboot, engage in joy. And so it's just going to get into the mood. And performance anxiety is a huge stressor for a lot of people when it comes to sex. We are often given ideas of how we should engage in sex. We are told this is the right way to engage in sex. This is, gosh, Cosmopolitan. How many magazines did I see growing up that were like 15 different ways to please your man in this way, or 15 different ways to give a blowjob, or 15 different ways to do X, or and then men's magazines, 15 different ways to make her have an orgasm. Again, these are very like binary, heteronormative, but I saw those messages so much growing up. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, I need to like buy this magazine because I have not had sex education anywhere else, or, and so it's people look to different outlets to get answers if no one's having these conversations with them. But it also gives this idea of, okay, well, if I do these 15 different things and they still don't have an orgasm, they still, like, I didn't please them in the way that these 15 different things told me I would, then I've failed. And when we have an idea, when we enter into a sexual experience with this idea in our minds, that there's a potential that we could fail at pleasing our partner in some kind of way, it gives us performance anxiety, and that in itself is a huge stressor and can make someone not enjoy that sexual experience. So when we let go of expectations, when we enter into a sexual experience without saying, okay, this is what this needs to look like, this is what's going to happen in the end, both people are going to orgasm, boom, done, or both, or however many people, or just myself, that's how this should go exactly. When we let go of expectations for ourselves, that actually helps us be able to focus more on the pleasure that we are experiencing without the expectation that it has to result in XYZ. And that can be really, really helpful for us. Another thing that often causes stress and that affects sexuality is comparing your sexuality to other people's. So we are also given the message growing up when people are looking at those different media outlets, whatever, this is what sex looks like. This is what people like. This is what they don't like. A lot of people turn to porn to watch different things. There's so many different types of porn, but often there's a lot of sexism within porn. Even for women are often shown like performatively having an orgasm just for the man, again, heteronormative, but it's to please the man, it's not for pleasure themselves. And so then that results in people saying, oh, that's what I should do, right? Again, people aren't having conversations. So then people are like, well, this is what I should do. Or I know even reading Come As You Are, one of the things that Dr. Emily Nagoski spoke to is that when teaching, she teaches or did teach at Smith College, and she would talk about sexuality and how all bodies are different. She always starts her class going over anatomies, right? Because all of our anatomies are different. There's a lot of different, like, there's just so many different pieces, right? Our vulvas don't all look the same. Penises don't all look the same. Just all of our sexual parts, our bodies in general, just we are not the same, right? Everybody's body is individual. It's different. Everyone's body is beautiful and deserves to be celebrated. But we often see certain bodies as the norm. Even in porn, you often see certain like vulvas, the vagina area, the vaginal area, you often see it look a certain way. And when we see that so often, we say that's normal. So if I don't look like that, if that's not how I am, then I'm messed up. So we're given all these messages that you are broken unless you look like this. You are broken unless you perform like this. And that is just absolutely not true. And that is why it's so important to get in touch with what feels good for you. That's why self-pleasure can be so helpful, because by learning your own body, taking a mirror, especially like for women, taking a mirror, looking at yourself, looking at your vulva, looking at your clitoral area, that can be so important, because it just gives you an idea of how you are pleased. By exploring your body yourself, you know how you are pleased, not somebody else. It's not what somebody else likes, it's what you like. And when you know what you like, you can communicate that with other people. And if anyone ever tells you what you like is not normal, then that is a violent statement. That's not okay, because what you like is you. You know your body best. And so comparing your sexuality to other people's often causes suffering versus joy. And so understanding your own body and communicating that is what is really helpful. And that's where also desire factors in. I know we talked about this when talking about the dual control model. Comparing the frequency at which you are aroused versus someone else, and saying one person is right and the other is wrong, that is really problematic in relationships. There's times that like men are taught very early on that like if they get sexual attention, they're often given the message, you should always want that, you should always want sex. Well, that's not true, right? If there is a man who has very sensitive brakes, few accelerators, that's just not going to be how often they experience desire, unless that's something that they choose to like work on, go through. But that's completely okay, right? If someone is in the mood, the quote unquote mood, but doesn't want to have sex, that's completely okay. Again, consent, of course, vital, mandatory, but nobody should ever be telling somebody else, you should be experiencing this more. You should be experiencing desire more. You should be initiating more. Those conversations should never be happening. And if people are having a discrepancy in how often they initiate or experience desire, that can be really stressful in a relationship. And one of the ways that you can fix that, or just something that can be, temporary to try out and see if it helps, is taking that expectation off again. So the person who's usually initiating, just saying, nope, that person's not going to initiate, the other person's not going to initiate. So then there's no pressure, no expectations. And what you often see is after, you say we're going to do this for 10 days or whatever that might be, however long you decide together, that can be really helpful to start to, again, without that performance anxiety, without that expectation, you're reducing stress, which is going to give you time to actually have your accelerators go and your brakes let off. And so oftentimes what you see is that is really helpful, but you see that the stress of performance anxiety or expectations, comparing your sexuality to others, can cause that stress. And unless that partnership is working to complete that stress response cycle together, it's just not going to be helpful. And another big thing, how stress can affect sex, context matters, of course. So again, talking about accelerators, brakes, context really matters. So I'm sure most people have been tickled at some point in their lives, and I'm sure you've had maybe a tickle experience that you absolutely freaking hated and you wanted to maybe punch that person in the face at times, which I would never recommend because I'm all about nonviolence. But I know I've had that feeling where I don't like that person. I don't want them touching me at all. And yet here they are trying to tickle me, to like engage with me in some kind of way. And I hate it. And maybe I view them as someone that I don't want them to touch my body. They don't have consent to touch my body. I have said stop, but they've laughed it off as something that's funny and like, oh, you're just taking this too seriously, and they continue. But for me, I am not perceiving them as a safe person. They've disrespected my boundaries. So now I'm seeing them more as a threat. And pleasure cannot coexist with threat. You cannot have pleasure, meaning like enjoy the experience if you perceive this person as a threat. And I want to clarify here, I guess what just came up for me too. I say this, you can't have pleasure, like meaning that you are actually enjoying the experience if you view the person as a threat. That being said, especially with sexual assault, there are absolutely times that people do orgasm and come with sexual assault. That can happen because, like we talked about earlier, like your body is scanning the environment for sexually relevant activity, and that's always happening. So even if you perceive somebody as a threat, someone's being sexually assaulted, if they do certain things, your body can still have a physical reaction of orgasming. That is normal. That does not mean, that absolutely does not mean that you enjoyed it, that you wanted it. It does not mean that it's your fault. That just means your body reacted in a way that's normal for bodies to react. And so that often makes people feel like, oh, well, I liked it. No, absolutely not. That is not what that means. And so I do want to address that. And that the concept there is this idea called non-concordance. And I don't have that in this presentation, but we can absolutely not be turned on. Our accelerators can not be going. Our brakes can be fully on, and we are still capable of having an orgasm or getting wet or experiencing an erection, whatever that looks like. That does happen. And for women that happens, so even this idea that being wet means someone's enjoying something, it doesn't necessarily, or the idea that the man has an erection so that they're enjoying something, or in the mood, that's not what that means. So that's why it's so important, even when we're talking about consent, to get verbal consent and check in with people, because our bodies respond to sexually relevant stimuli, but that doesn't mean they necessarily are enjoying it. So when I'm talking about context matters, and I say pleasure doesn't coexist with threat, I'm talking about, yes, how you actually are experiencing it. Anytime someone feels threatened, anytime someone feels like there's not a choice, that they can be free, anytime someone feels like their lives are at risk or they feel helpless and they just don't have a way to get out of an experience, that is never okay. And no one is ever going to actually be experiencing any type of sexual pleasure with that. And so I talk about tickling, but obviously that's other things as well. So tickling, and I spoke to you earlier, like there's been times I want to punch someone in the face, but then at the same time, there's definitely times where someone's tickling you and you laugh and you enjoy it, and you're in a place like you're not stressed out. You didn't just get stuck in 5 o'clock traffic on the way home and all you want to do is go watch reality TV. There's times that you get home, you had a safe drive home, it was really fast. Your partner wants to like just tickle you and like engage with you, and you laugh and you enjoy it. But then at the same time, the other scenario can happen. You're like, don't touch me at all. And that is, again, a factor of stress and of context. And it's important to realize stress can definitely come up within sex because you're being so vulnerable, right? Oftentimes the sexual experiences, you are sharing your body with somebody, whether that is through kissing, kissing in different areas, touching in different areas. You potentially are allowing your partner or whoever it is put a body part inside of your body, like you are literally sharing your body with somebody. And when you are being so vulnerable, in order for that to be a really good interaction, in order to really experience a lot of pleasure from that, it's going to be so important that you trust the person that you're being vulnerable with, that you have the answer to that question. Are you there for me, right? Are you here for me now? Are you going to be here for me tomorrow? Do you actually care about me? Are you here to be emotionally responsive to me? And so you'll hear when talking to people and asking them, like, what do you want from sex? What is great sex to you? You often hear people talk about great sex, like great long-term sustainable sex is the foundations for that are friendship and that trust piece. Because this is a friend, this is like that social connection that helps someone get through that stress response cycle. This is also someone that I feel safe with, that my body still is getting that message. You're safe here, you are safe with this person, these people, with yourself. And so this is okay. But that friendship and that trust really help go through that stress response cycle. And then sex as an obligation versus joy. Stress can definitely come up. Research has also shown that, so research has shown about the friendship and trust when people answered questions in regards to like, what do they need for great sex to occur? Those were two concepts that often came up. And again, this is research that Dr. Emily Nagoski referenced. So again, there's so much research out there. So know that if you look at something else, maybe something completely different comes up. So that's okay. But then I also, when listening to Dr. Emily Nagoski, there was a conversation which I thought was really interesting. When someone perceives sex as an obligation, then obviously that can be pretty stressful. But then people also talked about partners who really enjoy their sex are going to prioritize it. They're going to make time for it. And to some extent, they're going to schedule it. And for some people, the thought of even scheduling time to have quality time to engage in sexual pleasure is like, well, if you have to schedule it, then it's not spontaneous. And if it's not spontaneous, then that's not hot. Like you'll hear that argument. But in this, the metaphor that she used, which I really liked, was for some people, like you can go through all day, have a stressful day, but then have maybe on your calendar that you've set time aside to engage in sexual pleasure with your partner or with yourself or with multiple people, whatever that looks like. But you have that on your calendar, and it's kind of this almost same concept of you're getting home, you have a party that you committed to that you want to go to. You did want to go to, but all this stuff came up throughout the day that just really drained you. You're tired, you're sleepy, you're getting ready for the party, and you're still just like, eh. But then when you actually get to the party, you see your friends, you see your loved ones, and something clicks. And so you really enjoy that. And you do experience a lot of joy. But if you take that scenario and instead of a party that you enjoy going to with people that you like, it's people that you don't really like, don't really care about, you're never going to flip that switch, right? You aren't going to get to that joyous part. It's more of an obligation. So even when thinking about that, it's important to think about Are you seeing something as an obligation, or are you seeing it as something that's going to genuinely bring you joy? Are you doing something that you think is going to benefit you, that you're going to mutually enjoy once you get there, once you get to that party? Or is it something that once you get there, you're going to be like, this still is not someone that I enjoy being with. I don't know about this. I don't really trust this person. I just don't know enough about them to feel vulnerable fully with them, right? Because when you're not able to be fully vulnerable with somebody, or not even fully, but just a little bit, like when everything feels like, oh, you're gonna touch me there, I'm not sure about that, that can cause a lot of stress during that experience. And when you're experiencing stress during sex, it's going to be a lot harder to enjoy it, of course. So with all this information, I kind of want to round out this presentation with, okay, so we've talked about stress, the stress cycle, and exploring pleasure. And so with all of that, what happens if you do complete stress response cycles? And I just want to hone in that if you complete your stress response cycle, whether it's for the purpose of pleasure and sexual experiences or just for yourself to get that cortisol out of your body, it's really, really beneficial for your life. When you complete stress response cycles, you can live life with more patience, kindness, laughter. Your physiology is better. You have less chance of like heart disease, more health benefits, and overall you can have a better quality of life. And so I just think it's really important to acknowledge that we all experience stressors daily, pretty much at least one daily. And stressors can look like a huge fight, or it can look like that one person that is at a meeting and says, I'm not racist, I have a Black friend. That can be a stressor. That's a microaggression that lets you know that this person's really not safe to talk about race with. That in itself is a stressor, right? So stressors can look a lot of different ways. But when you acknowledge that, hey, I'm bound to experience a stressor most days, if not multiple on days, and so I need to be completing my stress response cycle to be in a place to explore pleasure more, to be in a place to enjoy my life more and have better health benefits. When you acknowledge that and begin to really focus and prioritize completing that stress response cycle, it can really benefit just your overall quality of life. And you will notice a change in your life over time, right? It's not going to be immediate, but over time, you will definitely notice that change. And so I listened to a couple of different podcasts to prepare for this. And then obviously I read these books. I'm definitely going to buy the Come As You Are workbook just because it interests me. And so again, today's presentation, I am coming from a place of curiosity as well. These are things that really interest me. But again, I am not a sex therapist or sex educator. So if these are topics that you're more interested in, you're more interested in understanding your own body and learning more about the turn-ons, the turn-offs, etc., I definitely encourage you to just continue to do your own research as well. These books resonate with me, but other books might absolutely resonate with you. And we will make sure to continue to post some different resources, even different sex therapists that you can follow. There's a lot on Instagram. There's a lot on TikTok. So there's a lot of really great resources out there, and I encourage you to find what works for you because, again, your sexuality is completely individualized. And so it's really important to acknowledge what works for your body, your stress cycle, and how you complete that, completely individualized. Some people prefer to reach out to other people prefer to do activities on their own. So just know whatever you're doing to live your best quality of life is absolutely the best, right? Trust yourself, trust your gut, get to know your body, what you like, if that's something that you're interested in doing, right? If right now is not the time, that's completely fine too. It's completely okay to not be engaging in sexual experiences. It's whatever works for you, whatever makes you the happiest. And if you are ever in a relationship, whether it's romantic, friendship, roommate, etc., where someone makes you feel like what works for you is not normal, is not okay, that's absolutely not okay. You deserve to have someone who's going to normalize what works for you, as long as it's not causing violence towards others, right? As long as consent is still present, as long as nobody else is being harmed in that process. Whatever works for you is absolutely a beautiful thing and deserves to be celebrated. So just want to let y'all know that. And this is my contact information. If you have any questions, any feedback, any topics that you want to see, know that I'm absolutely here. And just know that I am confidential. So if ever anything comes up in your relationship that you want to talk about, I'm here and I'm happy to have those conversations. And I hope to talk to y'all. So let me know if there's anything that you need. I hope that y'all have amazing finals and that things are going well and that you have an amazing holiday break to re-energize and recharge for next semester if you're coming back, and if you're graduating, woo, like congratulations, and I'm wishing you the best too as well. So thank you so much for your time.